Now, the name Rediffusion might not mean anything to people of a certain age because it died off in the 1980s, but people of my age will remember it as a name that appeared above television rental stores. People older than myself will remember it appearing before television shows on the commercial channels here. It'd say Associated Rediffusion. But it's a company that goes all the way back to the 1920s. That was its origin. I'll give you a bit of a potted history, but I'm aware a lot of people don't like me talking too much in these videos. So for those people, there'll be a timestamp at the bottom where you can skip past all this section. So the idea for this company dates back to 1927, a chap called Joshua Powell in his garage in Clacton-on-Sea. He had a radio. You might think, ooh, big deal. But in 1927, it was a big deal. Radio in the UK only started here at the beginning of the 1920s. The BBC started in 1922 with the one station. And by 1927, it was still a very rare thing to have a radio. Now, to have a radio in your house, you'd have to be able to afford it. They were very expensive. You could rent them if you wanted, but again, quite expensive. And a lot of houses didn't even have electricity at this point, so not much use renting something that you can't listen to. I mean, you could get rechargeable radios, but then you'd have to go and get the things recharged, so it's just a big hassle. So Joshua Powell's brainwave was, why not redistribute the audio from his radio to his neighbours? So he had a decent radio set up in his garage, and all he did was send wires off to speakers that were in his neighbours' houses. And he charged them a very small amount to rent these. Now, you might think, well, that's a bit of an odd idea. What if you want to change stations? Well, there aren't any other stations. I mean, there might be a couple of stations, maximum, maybe a local one, and the BBC. Most people are just listening to the BBC, though. So in these people's houses, they didn't need to have electricity because they've just got a wire coming into the speaker, and they've got this speaker that they can switch on to listen to the BBC or switch off to turn it off, and that's really as far as it goes. So this idea expands over the next few years. I think within a couple of years, he had like 200, 300 subscribers to his service. Now, this sounds a little bit dodgy, of course, nowadays. You imagine me redistributing the television from my satellite receiver over HDMI leads to all my neighbours. I don't think it would go down very well. But remember, this is back in the 1920s. 1931, it becomes a little bit more official with the company being formed, Rediffusion. Now, the name, well, we start off with diffusion, which means to spread something out, and then we've got re-spreading something out. I think nowadays you're thinking more like rebroadcast or redistribute. It's like a relay service. But yeah, basically what he's doing is sending radio out over wires. Now, this idea expands over the next few years, and they ended up putting sort of relay stations in parts of the country. So you'd have like a base station with a really decent aerial on it to pick up the radio, and then the people in that town would subscribe to the rediffusion service for a small amount per month, and they'd have a wire going to their house, and they'd be listening to the radio. So it's a cable network, but for radio. One benefit to it is there's no interference because the relay station gets a really good signal, so you're just getting your radio down a wire. In time, they developed systems where you could switch between two different radio stations on your speaker, but that was it. Now, this idea then expanded out to other countries, a lot of other countries.